Hey, it's all with another video, and thanks to the evil of game director of World of Warcraft, Ion Hazzikostas, I'm doing a second video on a Friday. Thanks. Anyway, Ian did an AMA over on the WoW subreddit, and AMA stands for Ask Me Anything, which doesn't exactly equate to that he'll answer everything, but here's what's going on. Given all the drama and the salt and the general actual issues that are coming from the Battle for Azeroth expansion so far, he decided to throw himself to the wolves and subject himself to the bombardment of questions that so far he has definitely been getting. What I'm going to do is abridge some of these questions because these questions are like really big walls of text, and then I'm going to approximate and try to understand Ian's answer and then give my own feedback and my reaction to it. Because I'm going to be paraphrasing a lot, I'm going to provide links below to all the questions that are being asked so you can read them for yourself, and you can tell me how much of an idiot I am in a comment below if you feel like it. And with all of that said and done, let's get started. The first question, thankfully, was my favorite, and this question and answer is very important because it helps to encompass, it helps to cover some of the other answers that are given later in this AMA. This is about Azerite. This was about Azerite armor, and it all sums up into just a couple of major bullet points. One is that the traits are underwhelming. They suck. Two is the whole treadmill of leveling up your Heart of Azeroth neck thingamajigger in order to unlock those traits on your head, your shoulders, or your chest. This is something, real quick, this is something that I had talked about in the weekly that I just put out, where I talked about, well, the context of just what are these traits that we're trying to unlock. The third point underlines the first 2 points, that the whole idea of running this treadmill and needing to catch up to re-unlock these sorts of traits that kind of suck make for a really turd system. Here are a couple things that Ian clarified. One is that when you get your Heart of Azeroth neck level to 18, 18, that's kind of funny, you'll be able to, at minimum, unlock the first trait of any piece of Azerite gear in the game, probably regardless of item level. That alone makes me feel a little bit better about the accessibility of the system. As you might remember, early in BFA, there were pieces of gear that you would get right at max level, and you couldn't even unlock the first trait, and that was a really crappy feeling. Thankfully, that's going away, and going forward, at least that first trait will always be unlocked. The fact that it's behind level 18 doesn't bear too much because of the Azerite knowledge system, and anybody with their alts will be able to get whatever the heck catch-up gear they have access to, and otherwise immediately start unlocking traits. The other nice point that Ian acknowledged is that yes, the traits do kind of suck. From my understanding, you can't help but have a certain form of passiveness when it comes to these skills. It's just that the design approach wasn't great. I don't mind it being somewhat passive, as in it doesn't have to be a new shiny extra button that I get to press, but it should alter my skills and abilities in such a way that maybe it changes rotation, maybe it causes different gameplay, maybe it'll make me want to allocate certain secondary stats more than when otherwise I wouldn't want to. It would have been nice if we got a little bit more clarification on some of the later skills, because Ian acknowledged that yes, some of these skills are pretty generic, they are pretty plain, especially those level 3 traits and especially the one in the very center. Maybe I'm wrong, but I really do think I'm onto something when I feel that those 3rd and 4th level traits, they're designed to be so out there and so inaccessible that you don't expect to get those until you have a really high knowledge level, as in it's just going to be something that you'll eventually unlock over time, as in this is just some way to soft nerf whatever content that we're doing currently. So it would have been nice if that was acknowledged, unless I'm wrong about it, but I think that would have helped to ease players' fears and at least get them focused on those first 2 traits rather than like the whole shebang. The next question refers to Shaman and some of the concerns that they suck. They even mentioned that some high-value community members had recently quit the game, not exactly in protest, but just because they feel like their class has been long and forgotten. I'm a little bit curious why Ian even bothered acknowledging the question. Before the AMA even started, it was already said that super specific questions that concern class or spec, that they probably wouldn't get addressed because it's a bit too specific. So unfortunately, Ian said pretty much Nothing. He pretty much had nothing to say about the class other than to just try to be patient and wait for something, and wait for what's coming in 8.1 or whichever patch the class will be addressed. On a slightly brighter note, though, other Blizzard staff had acknowledged that, hey, maybe they should have some sort of class-specific AMA. I think that would be pretty cool too. I gotta admit though, subjecting yourself as a developer to the thousands upon thousands of commenters that are participating in something like this, that really takes balls, man. The next question involves island expeditions. The concerns were with regards to the rewards as well as the system itself, that it was repetitive, that it was a bit too fast, but at the same time not very exciting. Ian acknowledged that yes, it is a little bit too repetitive despite the different kinds of varying rewards and varying encounters and combinations of events that could happen. From the look of the answer though, it doesn't appear that there's going to be any like massive revamp that's just all of a sudden going to make island expeditions so fun and engaging and wow. But Ian focused on the structure of island expeditions, which probably includes the systems that govern the random AI that we encounter, as well as the randomly spawning systems that appear periodically throughout these expeditions. So he pretty much identified the goal as in, getting Azerite before the other team. That seemed to be the primary weakness of these expeditions. It's pretty much on a time limit. So hear me out. There could be something cool like an advanced dungeon. So imagine a dungeon that's less the kind of dungeon run that we do, but more like the dungeon crawl. Like think of Blackrock Depths or some, big sprawling dungeons like that, where you and your small team, you're going through, you're exploring stuff, you're looking for loot, fighting bad guys, and then boom, all of a sudden a team of the enemy comes after you. In this case, it's not exactly the opposite faction, but some other weird faction like the Mogu, the Jinyu, the Hosen, or whatever the heck other race that you feel like encountering. I think something like that, an advanced dungeon, would be pretty cool and I think that'll really scratch the itch of people that are looking for that sort of gameplay. The next piece comes from a raid standpoint, and this person was trying to get some understanding as to how raid testing was being handled internally. There was another part of his question that involved something about system homogenization, and it's not something that Ian addressed, and I'm having trouble understanding it too. But he did talk about the teams that do QA testing for raids. Short story, one time when I applied for Blizzard, I tried to do it as a QA tester for raiding specifically, and they asked me a couple raid questions, and I had no idea what to say. Anyway, Ian gave a few anecdotes, some of them old actually, reminiscing about the Tomb of Sargeras raid and Fighting Kill Jaden, and how their QA team, they brought some people on that happened to be pretty darn good at the game, and what happened was that their testing and tuning was basically overtuned by the time they made it to live. The next question talks about Warfront and the pacing and how it kind of sucks. So Ian broke down the scheduling system of Warfront and how it's going to work, how you're going to get a number of days of having the Warfront itself, having a couple of weeks of owning the zone, and then going back and going through the whole contribution phase. I think that the concerns with Warfronts were more of a planning and staging problem rather than just the implementation. I mean, I'm on the record when I say that Warfronts is an activity that I find pretty fun, but I do understand the gap. It does kind of suck. So it would have been nice if they had planned this with having 2 Warfronts available, and that way they would have some sort of staggered rotation. So the time between doing not Warfront stuff is going to be cut in half. This is something that Ian talked about only briefly, saying that yes, they're going to open up additional Warfronts over time, but it really would have been nice if they launched both at once. I can kind of understand why though, because Warfronts might have been like a total dud by the time it came out, or it would have just have taken much too much time to implement. Of course, there are those who are definitely willing to wait an additional month or 2 or more in order to get a better polished quality expansion out, but that's hindsight. The next question is about Mythic Plus and Azerite Gear. The person asking this question was pretty dissatisfied with the way that this loot is being distributed. In case you didn't already know, high-level Azerite Gear only comes from that weekly cache, and apparently you only have a chance to get one. Ian explained in his answer the reasoning why they changed from 3 drops to just 1. That's beside the point though. The issue at hand for me, and I'm not even that big of a mythic dungeoneer person, is that the weekly chest is that one chance for maybe that piece of Azerite gear to drop. That's once per week. That kind of sucks. He mentions bad luck protection here too. Seems like more of an insult than anything. Remember, there's only so many weeks in a tier, so raiders can only get so much raid gear when it's current. In this case, mythic dungeoneers can only get so much out of that chest, and if there's only a chance that you can get Azerite gear, then that's a very small amount of gear that you would get. The popular suggestion that I constantly see is that the weekly chest should always drop at least one piece of Azerite gear from the pool, and as well as, a chance at whatever else. But personally, I think that sucks. I don't think that's a great way to go about it at all. It does a couple of things. For one, it creates this unintended behavior that you absolutely must run your minimum highest key, just like how you did before, in order to get that piece of gear, Azerite gear. Otherwise, you run the risk of falling behind. It also does not address the inability to target the kind of gear that you want. So while my idea isn't a very great suggestion either, here it is. I think at the end of every Mythic Plus dungeon, there should be a chance to get a piece of Azerite loot from that particular pool in that dungeon. And that's going to do a couple of things. It's going to make people interested in running specific dungeons if they can find that specific dungeon at a high key so they can get the best item level bracket gear that they can possibly get. Being able to have the access and not being totally closed off from opportunities, I think is going to be huge for the long-term health of Mythic Plus in this whole Azerite gear system. I'm sure there's plenty of potential for unintended behavior, like just perpetually doing runs. So I don't know, maybe there can be some sort of limit, like you have to actually make the timer and then you get a chance at that Azerite gear. If you don't make the time, then you don't get squat. I don't know. But I think something like that is much better than one chance to get a piece of Azerite gear every week. That just... it kind of sucks. The next question talks about simming, and I already feel bad because I feel like I'm going to be talking smack about the OP here, because I'm sure that they're very passionate about the game just like everybody else, but it feels like a non-question. And because of that, Ian gave a sort of non-answer. And here's what I mean. The question pretty much sums up to the conundrum that this particular person has about the need to sim gear in order to find out what's good. This person's making the argument that the gear needs to be clearly defined, or like Azerite traits as another example, need to be clearly defined so that players can make an easier choice as to find out what's good, because having to sim, it takes out the immersion. Ian's response is that yes, they do try to make some interesting atomization with different procs and different effects, but with all of those comes all that additional complication with having to calculate, okay, is this itemized well? The solution to something like that would be to remove secondary stats and forget about Azerite traits and trinkets and just make everything all about stamina and a primary stat, and that's it. That of course is going to give you the most clear numerical value literally as to whether or not one piece of gear is better than the other. It would be nice if there were tooltips that could give values like, hey, here's the proc per minute, or something like that. Little things like that do help, but because we're in a world where simming is so accessible, I think that's just a culture that each individual person would need to get away from if they really want to liberate themselves from simming. It's not going to be Blizzard's job to do it for you without, like I said, gutting all secondary stats and effects. People just need to realize that the reason why they're simming is because they want to sim. Full disclosure, I'm the type of person who doesn't sim. I just kind of eyeball it and hope for the best. The next person talks about giving feedback and how it seems to be ignored. Whenever this person had put in bugs or presented issues, that there was no acknowledgement. And this has been a conversation that has taken place since time began. So this is my field, QA. Ooh, it's game time. And what's really cool is that Ian gave us numbers to work with, and we don't know if they're real numbers or if they're super accurate numbers, but he did say that there were over 30,000 bugs entered and tracked over the course of BFA's alpha, beta, and release since, and that 95% of those have been fixed. That's a lot of bugs. That's 1,500 bugs. Going through even one bug is an entire process. A lot of the time you have to go through player reports for that sort of issue, and on the beta, there's a very limited number of ticks I call them ticks that you're able to look at. On live, you have a considerably larger pool to work with. So from there, the QA tester or analyst is able to identify a pattern and make a test case, and then have the team take a look at it, and then they will be able to test it out, do a number of ticks, see if they can replicate it, and then from there, that needs to be communicated to the engineers that might be in charge of it, or defer to one of those engineers, and from there, they will prioritize it into a system. And I didn't even talk about classifying bugs or prioritizing them. Ugh, God. Anyway, once that engineer identifies the bug, then that probably needs to be put into a scope, because there might be a couple of stages that have to go in order to even resolve or fix that bug. Fast forward, once that bug is fixed, then it has to go back to the QA team to be vetted and to be verified. It goes into a proverbial pipe, which is pretty much like the hot fix, and then it's deployed, and hopefully nothing else broke. And that's quite the machine. I've barely begun to even talk about the full understanding of just what it is to fix bugs and issues and trying to prioritize them. And I did small stuff, doing something for like an MMO where a single patch can affect various game systems that you wouldn't have thought would have ever happened. That's a very scary thought. It doesn't take away from Blizzard's responsibility one bit, but it's still scary. So I just feel for them for it. The next question is the worst question. This question talks about the perception of time gating. And this person is bringing up the concern that Blizzard is pacing the game in such a way to increase MAUs, subscriber numbers, playtime, that sort of thing. He's basically going into that sort of theory. I feel only the smallest bit of guilt for fully siding with Ian in his answer, because all he did really was just kind of turn that around and say, well, yeah, you can see it like, hey, we're just trying to keep you subscribed and logged into the game because that makes us look good. But then he just twisted it in a more positive way and said, well, we just want you to have fun. If you're having fun, doesn't that mean you're logged in and you're having a good time and you're playing the game and so on and so forth? He does go on, speaking for Blizzard, to say that they don't want people to be logged into the game or to be forced to be logged into the game not having fun. That doesn't exactly create a good culture. And whether or not you're actually having fun, that's not what Blizzard intends. The way I see it, the conclusion that some of these critics come to when they get to that is just them falling for their own cynicism and just not quite seeing that game developers aren't there to exactly take your money, but they are. It's just that making sure that you have a good time is the most fun way to do it. The next concern was quite the wall of text, and the piece that Ian decided to answer was with regards to reps, namely the rep grind and how that applies to alts. Ian himself got excessively wordy going into the philosophy of alts and all that. The real answer was somewhere stuck in here. Basically, he said, yeah, there's going to be some sort of catch-up mechanism for the Champions of Azeroth faction over time. But with regards to the other reputations, the way that reputations work these days, they become a lot more benign than they did in the past. I often refer back to Mr. Pandaria reputations where you needed to have those in order to get a certain recipe. These days, it's not nearly as bad because largely you need to get to a certain reputation to get a certain rank of recipe. You already have the base recipe, it's just that for the time being, it's going to take a few more materials to craft such and such item. The next question talks about profession items, as in Expulsum, Hydrocore, Sanguicell, that sort of stuff. And I think this was addressed before in a previous Q&A. Basically, the question was, hey, what are we going to do with our excess materials? And suspiciously, Ian had very little to say about it, simply that they're going to discuss what they're going to do about it. Of course, that enraged some of the commenters below, and I try not to read the commenters below, but I just couldn't resist. Well, we've had stuff like this before for other previous currencies, such as Spirit of Harmony, Blood of Sargeras, and so on and so forth. I talked about this early at some point, but my opinion on why Ian is giving a non-answer to this is because it's going to cause a weird economic reaction in part of people that are just going to start farming for these materials so they can have some sort of competitive advantage either. For those of you who kind of recall, towards the end of Legion when they announced that, hey, Awakening Essence is going to be a thing that you can trade for legendary stuff, and then all of a sudden players were farming the crap out of it. So statements like that do have an effect on the community. They cause what could potentially be unintended behavior, especially when they don't quite have it exactly set in stone how they want to measure these currencies. If Blizzard was to say something early, as in right now, they would need to inflate the cost of these trades by such an amount to make it so that there is no competitive advantage. So it sounds dumb, but there are clear intentions as to why Ian's not saying anything here. The next question comes from a pro monk asking about certain kinds of mechanics that compel players to take a lot of damage in order to bounce back even more damage. Ian went as far as to say that it's not healthy for the game. Whether or not this results in a backlash from the community saying, hey, you're pruning my skill or you're gutting my skill and making it not cool, this is a class fantasy sort of thing. That remains to be seen. The next question talks about Paragon reputation and as to why there isn't Paragon reputation in BFA right now. Ian didn't say why, but he did say that they would reintroduce Paragon rep in a later patch. So why? I'm just speculating here, but I don't think Blizzard wanted to front load that much grinding in the 8.0 of this expansion. I think that there's a time and place for it, and putting in all those grinds together when on top of that you might be interested in farming your alt or creating your allied race. I think in this case Blizzard probably just wanted to have a little bit more breathing room. The next question was about mounts and the fact that Alliance got a lot of horsies while the Horde got a lot of everything. Ian answered and more or less admitted that they decided on the mounts based on two criteria. One is just how local these zones are and what kind of creatures inhabit the area, and on top of that, they wanted to avoid creatures that fly. I know that I'm speaking from a very Horde-centric opinion, but Cool Terrace is a human continent. I would imagine that most of what you see there is horsies and that kind of thing. But all of that summed up into one pretty much confirmation: there's going to be a B mount. The next question circled back to a familiar loop, the feeling that players are being ignored by Blizzard. This time it was Josh Allen, aka Lore, that fielded this question, and pretty much repeated what he has been saying for quite some time now, that they're not happy with it, that they were trying to do stuff, things worked here, they didn't work there, they want to do better again in the future. And you know what? I would actually like to hear what this organizational communication structure is. I think it'd be kind of cool to have a sort of like a video blog or a blog that kind of details just how the community team works at Blizzard. I think it would be a good way to show a little bit of transparency, even if it is kind of rehearsed or dolled up. But it gives players such as us who have these kinds of concerns a little bit of illumination as to how the machine runs. And with that, the AMA was done, but not before a little bit of information was left. There's going to be a patch deployed onto the PTR supposedly very soon, and then on September 18th at 11 a.m. Pacific time on the Warcraft Twitch channel, they're going to do another live stream where they're going to talk about the content of this patch. So, we didn't have to wait all the way till BlizzCon. Thank goodness. So that's going to wrap it up for me. I hope that this weird convoluted format was useful and that you're able to get some information out of it. Please like this video if you found it helpful and subscribe to the channel so I can keep giving you more of this and all things Warcraft. I'll see you in the next thing that I do, but until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.